It's day 2, PDAC 2025, and we're here with world-renowned critical mineral expert Constantine Karayannopoulos. How are you today?
I'm very well, Tracy. Thank you for having me on your program again.
Well, as always, it's a pleasure. PDAC 2025, what are some of the objectives you hope to gain from being here this year?
Well, again, I sort of mill around the critical minerals world, so I was in a very upbeat lithium summit this morning. I'm meeting with friends and clients and former colleagues in the rare earth space. So yeah, I'll just get a view as to how the world is unfolding in terms of lithium, rare earths, other critical minerals, EVs, batteries, and the like. And that will probably inform some of the things that I'm doing. So yeah, it's always informative to be at PDAC.
Well, of course, every time I get an opportunity to speak to you, I always have so many questions, but let's start with Brazil. I know you've been doing a lot of work in Brazil. Tell us why Brazil is such an attractive place for investors in critical minerals right now.
Well, right off the bat, there's two fundamental reasons for that. First is the fact that the Brazilian government is developing an industrial strategy with a lot of money behind it, in the order of $60 billion, which for a country like Brazil is a lot of money. Specifically, there is a component on rare earths, lithium and other critical minerals, with also a lot of money behind it. And I'm advising the Bank of Development, BNDES. They're holding a supply chain conference next week in Rio. So I'm looking forward to being in Rio for the first time and speaking about how supply chains come together and what it takes. So the government's role is one fundamental reason why I really like what's going on in Brazil. The second is that, having been in the rare earth industry since the early 90s, I lived through the time when ionic clays as a rare earth source, or a source of rare earths, absolutely revolutionized the industry. So I've been looking for clays as good as the South China clays ever since. And I can say with a high degree of certainty that Brazil has clays that are at least as good and perhaps better than what South China and now Myanmar, Vietnam, etc. have. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in the critical mineral space in Brazil, especially for rare earths and lithium. So keep following the news about Brazil, because I think you will see some pretty big things happening there.
Well, speaking of following the news, why don't we just segue right to Ukraine? Ukraine and rare earths is one of the top rare earth experts in the world, Ukraine. Should we all be fighting for the critical minerals in Ukraine?
I think we should be fighting for Ukraine, and if there's any critical minerals there, that's a matter to be sort of discussed and figured out over the next few years. As far as I know, and I've reached out to people a lot smarter than myself who spend a lot of time in Ukraine, and they have looked at the data, I don't think we can say with any confidence that there are any economically recoverable deposits. In fact, there are no deposits. What we have in Ukraine are occurrences. People have seen some rare earths here and there, but the time and the effort and the money has not been spent to turn those occurrences into deposits the way we understand them on the Toronto Stock Exchange in terms of 43-101 resource estimates. And then so that will take 5 years at least from when we start, and a lot of money in the millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. And once we discovered and established the fact that there's deposits, then we need to spend tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and another 5 to 10 years to turn those deposits to figure out whether they're economically recoverable resources. So we're so far away from making decisions on the basis of what rare earths are in the Ukraine that I think the whole debate and conversation has been rather surreal.
So On that note, your associate and colleague, Jack Lifton, keeps talking about repeatedly, at least to us at InvestorNews, about how the U.S. should be looking at investing in the capital resources for the development of critical minerals in Canada. Jack says we need Canada for the critical minerals. Would you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. I think the Western world needs to be looking at known deposits for critical minerals, whether they're in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, perhaps even in Africa, and definitely Brazil. So yeah, there's much better places to be looking, especially if you want to be sourcing critical minerals in the next 5 to 10 years. You're not going to get those from the Ukraine. So it would be effort and money spent in much smarter ways by looking in places like Canada or helping Canadian companies develop the assets, the rare earth and lithium assets that they have in this country. Same thing in the United States. There's some very attractive deposits, some of which are being developed. So yeah, I think, as I said, that's one of the reasons why I said that the conversation was rather surreal about Ukraine, because in terms of priorities and how we should be spending time, effort, and money, I think it's, if we're looking to catch up to our greatest competitors around the world and do so in the next few years, I think we need to focus on what we can do in Canada, North America, Brazil, South America, Australia, and other mining-friendly and much easier to access jurisdictions.
You probably have a better understanding of what actually are critical in the critical mineral list around the world. A lot of people are talking to me about germanium, gallium, antimony. Do you have any comments on what you're prioritizing as criticals?
Well, we need to start with rare earths and lithium because, I'm familiar with those, but in terms of where the world's economy is going, I think there's no question, regardless of the bottom of the cycle that we find ourselves right now, I think ultimately any industrial expansion will need both rare earths and lithium, not only on EVs or stationary batteries, but the continuous decarbonization of energy consumption and energy production. So those are truly critical minerals. There are some other elements on the periodic table that China has decided to restrict its exports, I guess responding to restrictions on trade with Chinese companies. And in my view though, the elements you mentioned, antimony, germanium and gallium, they're so small volume. Yes, they're critical. However, the West does produce a little bit of gallium. In fact, when I was working for a living at NEO, we had a plant in Peterborough, Ontario, an hour and a half from here, producing gallium from recycled sources. And gallium isn't as critical. I mean, $50 million will build you a world-class gallium production facility next to any bauxite to alumina plant. That's where gallium comes from. It's a byproduct from alumina production. So if we really think gallium is critical, it doesn't take that much to solve that problem. So germanium is a little more esoteric. You need, again, it's a byproduct element that comes from zinc, tin, etc. But I think if we really felt, before the Chinese government put restrictions on dual trade of gallium and germanium, if we really felt they were critical, we should have been working on this a long time ago. And if we decide now that they're critical, 3 years and $50 million will get us there. So to me, those elements are not that difficult to deal with. Rare earths and lithium, though, is much more difficult because you're talking about bigger capex and selling into a market that's dominated by some very big, very profitable, and very knowledgeable Chinese players.
And of course, lithium. The market is providing inconsistent data and information and coverage on lithium The market says one day we need lithium, the next day we don't need lithium. Let's ask an expert. Do we continue to need lithium?
Well, as I said, I was at a lithium summit this morning, and I think we're probably are going to be, at least from the projections that more knowledgeable and smarter people than me are talking about, I think 2025, the end of 2025 going into 2026, we could be entering into a deficit, a small deficit. As long as the elevated inventories are there, it will not be noticed or felt, but by the end of the 2026 timeframe, we're probably going to be getting into a deficit. And projections for 28, 29, 30 seem to indicate that we're not mining enough, we're not producing enough lithium, and even in the projects that are in the pipeline may not be sufficient to get us there. So yeah, this is how the resource cycle manifests itself, right? You go from feast to famine. So when there's a shortage, we'll see 30, 40, 50, perhaps even $70 lithium like we saw a couple of years ago, lithium carbonate equivalent that is. And then of course when production either catches up or demand slows down, we'll see $10 lithium carbonate equivalent like we have now. So feast and famine. I think we're finishing the famine part of the cycle, and we're slowly, over the next year, year and a half, I think we'll be entering the feast part of the cycle. And we've been through this so many times before. Nothing new.
So the upcoming Critical Mineral Summit, May 13th, 14th, you're our keynote speaker.
So you tell me, yes, absolutely.
Any idea what you're going to be speaking about, or what theme? Or is it too early, because things are changing so rapidly right now?
Tracy, as you and I have talked at the summit before, at your summits before, my favorite topic to talk about is what lessons should we be learning and from whom? And what mistakes should we be avoiding? I don't think we understand our competition well enough. So I'm hoping to share some of my experiences in Brazil with the development bank, and hopefully there will be some lessons that we should be learning, or I'll be learning, and I'll be happy to talk about in May.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to it, and for those of you interested in finding out more, please go to the criticalmineralsummit.com website. Thank you, Constantine.
Thank you, Tracy.